My name is Linda, and I am 60 years old. As a retired public school art teacher, I spent 30 years nurturing creativity and building confidence in young minds, believing that every child deserves someone who saw their potential. After a difficult divorce that left me emotionally wounded but not broken, I remarried Arthur, a gentle man whose 14-year-old daughter Chloe had stolen my heart from the moment we met. I opened my heart completely to this beautiful girl, investing not just emotional energy and time, but over $50,000 of my personal savings into creating a warm, stable home where she could heal from the loss of her mother and flourish into the remarkable young woman I knew she could become. For 3 years, we were a real family. I believed completely in our blended household, in the love that bound us together, in the future we were building as mother and daughter in every way that mattered. Then Arthur vanished, leaving behind a devastating trail of secrets that would destroy everything I held sacred. He fled in the night, abandoning not just me, but his own daughter, all to escape $800,000 in gambling debts that I never knew existed. His family, led by his venomous sister Brenda, descended on us like vultures, accusing me of being a gold digger and an abusive stepmother. They froze our bank accounts, cut our utilities, and turned my beloved Chloe against me with vicious lies. "Did you abuse me?" Chloe asked through tears, her innocent voice breaking my heart. "Dad said you only care about money. My integrity, my love for this child I had raised as my own, my entire identity, all brutally maligned and destroyed in a matter of days. I felt utterly discarded, abandoned, branded a monster by the very people I had sacrificed everything to protect. Yet as despair threatened to consume me, something awakened within me. An art teacher's keen eye for subtle detail ignited a cold fury that surprised even me. What Arthur Brenda and his entire family didn't know was my secret weapon, meticulous Art of Motherhood journals. I had kept documenting every precious moment with Chloe, every sign of her growth and happiness, every piece of evidence that refuted their cruel accusations. More importantly, Chloe herself, unknowingly, had kept her own diary, chronicling her father's increasingly erratic behavior, his mounting debts, and my unwavering care and love for her. My allies, a compassionate school counselor who had watched me nurture Chloe, and a local family court judge who understood the complexities of blended families, were waiting in the wings. This time, their insidious slander wouldn't just unravel. It would expose their cruelty, prove my innocence, and protect the daughter of my heart, whatever the agonizing cost. The nightmare began on a Tuesday morning in October, 3 days after Arthur disappeared, leaving only a hastily scrawled note on the kitchen counter. "I'm sorry. I can't face what I've done. Take care of Chloe." Chloe and I sat in our suddenly cold, dark home, the utilities having been mysteriously disconnected overnight. The furnace was silent, the refrigerator had stopped humming, and even our internet was dead. We huddled together under blankets, trying to understand how our comfortable life had become a scene of abandonment and confusion. "Mom, Linda," Chloe whispered, using the name she had chosen for me when we became a family. "Where did Dad go? Why won't the lights work?" Before I could answer, the front door burst open without warning. Brenda, Arthur's older sister, stormed into our home with the righteous fury of someone who believed she was on a rescue mission. Behind her came a parade of Arthur's extended family cousins, aunts and uncles I barely knew, all wearing expressions of disgust and moral superiority. "You," Brenda pointed at me with a trembling finger, her face contorted with rage. "You drove my brother away, you greedy witch. Look what you've done to this poor child. We know what you really are, a gold digger who manipulated a grieving widower and abused his innocent daughter. Chloe shrank against me, confused and frightened by the sudden invasion of hostile relatives. I tried to shield her with my body while attempting to understand what was happening to our lives. "Brenda, please," I said, struggling to maintain some semblance of calm. "I don't know where Arthur went. I'm as shocked as you are. Chloe and I are trying to figure out what happened, and we need to work together. Brenda's voice rose to a shriek that echoed through our home. "You're a monster, Linda. You have no humanity. You're losing your mind if you think you'll get a penny from our family. We know about Arthur's debts, $800,000, that you probably helped him spend on your selfish wants." The number hit me like a physical blow. $800,000. Arthur had never mentioned any significant debts. Our finances had always been managed separately, with him handling his business accounts while I managed our household expenses. How could there be debts of such magnitude without my knowledge? I knew nothing about any debts. I protested, my voice breaking with shock and confusion. "Arthur never told me about any financial problems. I've been using my own retirement savings to help with household expenses and Chloe's needs. I would never—" "Liar!" Brenda screamed, spittle flying from her lips as her rage consumed all rational thought. "You manipulated him. You isolated him from his family. You turned him against us so you could control his money and abuse his daughter. We have proof of what you are." I felt Chloe's small hand slip into mine, her grip tight with fear and confusion. This beautiful girl who had called me Mom Linda for 3 years, who had shared her deepest secrets and dreams with me, was now being told that the woman who had loved her unconditionally was actually her abuser. "Is it true?" Chloe's voice was barely a whisper, but it cut through me like a blade. "Did you abuse me? Dad said you only care about money." The betrayal in those words was staggering. Arthur had not just abandoned us, he had poisoned his own daughter's mind against me before he fled. The man I had trusted with my heart had used my love for Chloe as a weapon to destroy us both. Arthur's extended family formed a hostile circle around us, their faces filled with judgment and condemnation. His cousin Robert stepped forward with a stack of official-looking papers. "These are notices from Arthur's creditors," he announced with the authority of someone delivering a death sentence. "Mr. Davies, the primary debt collector, has been very clear about the situation. Arthur owes $800,000 to various gambling establishments and loan sharks. Since you're his wife, Linda, you're now legally responsible for these debts." The papers fluttered to the floor as my hands began to shake uncontrollably. Legally responsible for gambling debts I never knew existed. How was this possible? That's not how marriage law works. I said, my voice growing stronger as my teaching background kicked in. "I'm not responsible for debts I didn't incur, especially gambling debts that were hidden from me." Brenda's laugh was cruel and triumphant. "Oh, you naive little fool. You think your precious legal protections will save you. We have evidence of your abuse, your manipulation, your gold-digging schemes. By the time we're finished with you, no court in the country will believe a word you say." The attacks continued for hours, with different family members taking turns hurling accusations and threats. They rifled through our belongings, claiming that various items belonged to Arthur and therefore to his estate. They questioned Chloe repeatedly, trying to get her to admit that I had been cruel or neglectful. "Remember when Linda made you clean your room?" Brenda coached with false gentleness. "That was abuse, sweetie. Remember when she said you couldn't have dessert until you finished your vegetables? That was controlling behavior." I watched in horror as they systematically reinterpreted every normal parenting interaction as evidence of abuse. Bedtimes became imprisonment, chores became slave labor, educational expectations became psychological torture. The most devastating moment came when Mr. Davies himself arrived, a thin man in an expensive suit whose cold eyes suggested he had perfected the art of human intimidation. He looked around our home with the calculating gaze of someone appraising assets for seizure. "Mrs. Linda," he said, his voice carrying the weight of legal authority, "I represent several creditors who are owed substantial sums by your husband Arthur. Since he has apparently fled the jurisdiction, you are now our primary avenue for debt recovery. I suggest you begin liquidating assets immediately to avoid criminal charges for harboring a fugitive and conspiracy to defraud creditors." "I didn't know about any debts," I repeated, feeling like a broken record. I had no knowledge of Arthur's gambling or his financial obligations. I've been using my own money to support this household. Mr. Davies smiled with the cold satisfaction of a predator who had cornered his prey. "That's exactly what someone involved in a conspiracy would say. Your ignorance, real or feigned, doesn't absolve you of responsibility. These debts must be paid, and this house is the most valuable asset available for seizure." Our home, the sanctuary I had created with my life savings, the place where Chloe and I had built our mother-daughter bond, the only stability left in our shattered world, was now being threatened by creditors who saw us as nothing more than obstacles to their money. Brenda delivered the final blow with malicious glee. "You have 48 hours to vacate this house," she announced, producing what appeared to be an official eviction notice. "It's being claimed as part of Arthur's estate to satisfy his debts, and if you try to take Chloe with you, I'll have you arrested for kidnapping. She belongs with family now, not with the woman who drove her father away." As the hostile crowd finally left, taking several of Arthur's belongings and leaving us with an ultimatum that seemed impossible to meet, I held Chloe close and felt the full weight of our devastation settling around us. We had gone from being a loving family to homeless refugees in the span of 72 hours. Arthur's betrayal had been complete. He had not just abandoned us financially and emotionally, but he had set us up to be destroyed by his own family's greed and vindictiveness. But as I looked into Chloe's confused, frightened eyes, I made a silent promise. I would not let them win. I would not let them destroy this innocent child with their lies and manipulation. I was a teacher who had spent 30 years protecting children from cruelty and injustice, and I would use every skill I had learned to protect the daughter of my heart. The battle for our family was just beginning. The assault on our lives escalated with military precision in the days following Brenda's initial attack. What had begun as accusations and threats evolved into a systematic campaign designed to strip away every foundation of security and dignity that Chloe and I had built together. I woke each morning to find more of Arthur's belongings mysteriously disappearing from our home. Brenda and her allies had apparently obtained some form of legal authority to remove his possessions, and they exercised this right with calculated cruelty, taking items that held sentimental value for Chloe while leaving behind obvious reminders of her father's abandonment. "Where's Daddy's coffee mug?" Chloe asked one morning, her voice small and lost, the one with the funny cartoon that made him laugh. I had to explain that her aunt had taken it along with photograph albums, books, and even some of Chloe's own artwork that featured her father. Each missing item was another wound in a child who was already struggling to understand why her world had collapsed. But the most insidious part of their campaign was the way they manipulated Chloe's memories and perceptions. During their frequent visits, Brenda and her allies would sit with Chloe and ask seemingly innocent questions designed to plant seeds of doubt about my character and motivations. "Sweetie," Brenda would say with false maternal concern, "did Linda ever make you feel bad about asking for things? Did she ever say mean things about your daddy? Did she ever hurt you when she was angry?" I watched helplessly as they systematically reinterpreted 3 years of loving interactions through a lens of suspicion and malice. Every normal moment of parenting became potential evidence of abuse or manipulation in their twisted narrative. The financial pressure intensified when Mr. Davies began sending daily notices, each more threatening than the last. According to his communications, I was not just responsible for Arthur's $800,000 in gambling debts, but also for penalties, interest, and legal fees that were accumulating at an alarming rate. Mrs. Linda, one certified letter read, "Your continued refusal to cooperate with debt recovery efforts constitutes obstruction of justice and conspiracy to defraud legitimate creditors. Criminal charges will be filed within 10 days unless you provide full financial disclosure and begin immediate asset liquidation." The psychological warfare was as devastating as the financial assault. I began to doubt my own memories and perceptions as the constant accusations wore down my resistance. Had I been too strict with Chloe? Had my financial contributions to the household somehow enabled Arthur's gambling? Was I really the selfish, manipulative woman they claimed I was? It was during one of these dark moments of self-doubt that I overheard a phone conversation that changed everything. Brenda was in our kitchen speaking with someone on her cell phone while she supervised another removal of Arthur's belongings. "The old hag thinks she'll keep the house," Brenda said with casual cruelty, apparently believing I was out of earshot. "We'll make sure she's penniless and that girl is out of her toxic clutches. Arthur's debt is her problem now, but his daughter belongs with real family." The chilling calculation in her voice revealed the truth I had been too devastated to see clearly. This wasn't about protecting Chloe or honoring Arthur's memory. This was about systematic revenge and financial exploitation orchestrated by people who saw his disappearance as an opportunity to destroy the woman they had never accepted as part of their family. "The best part," Brenda continued, "is that she actually believes we care about the kid. Poor little Linda thinking her love matters. Once we get custody, we can do whatever we want with both the girl and the house." The revelation hit me like a physical blow. Chloe wasn't being rescued from an abusive stepmother. She was being used as a weapon in a calculated campaign of cruelty and greed. The family that claimed to love her was actually planning to exploit her trauma for their own benefit. But this moment of clarity also brought back a flood of painful memories about another secret I had kept to protect Arthur and maintain our family's stability. In the quiet of our empty home with Chloe sleeping fitfully in her bed, I found myself confronting a truth I had buried for 3 years. Early in our marriage, Arthur had come to me in a state of complete panic. He had been caught embezzling $50,000 from his previous employer, a crime that could have sent him to prison and destroyed any chance of building a life with Chloe. The money had been taken to cover earlier gambling debts, a pattern of addiction, and poor choices that I was only beginning to understand. "Linda," he had sobbed in our bedroom, "I'm going to lose everything. My job, my freedom, my daughter. They're going to press criminal charges and Chloe will have to live with strangers. I can't let that happen to her." Without hesitation, I had used $20,000 from my carefully saved retirement fund to secretly cover the embezzlement. More than that, I had helped Arthur fabricate financial records and coached him through a complex legal strategy that shifted blame to a bookkeeping error rather than deliberate theft. I had risked my own reputation and integrity to protect not just Arthur, but Chloe's future stability. The little girl who was now being turned against me had been saved from foster care by my willingness to compromise my own ethical standards and financial security. The irony was staggering. Brenda's accusations of gold digging were being hurled at a woman who had repeatedly given up her own financial interests to protect Arthur's family. The claims of manipulation were being made against someone who had sacrificed her own career advancement to provide stability for a grieving child. When I tried to subtly allude to Arthur's past struggles, hoping to awaken some sense of fairness or gratitude in his family, Brenda's response was swift and brutal. "Arthur was a good man before you got your claws into him," she screamed, her face flushed with righteous indignation. "You're lying about his character to cover your own tracks, you gold-digging witch. You have no humanity. You were always a bitter, cold woman who resented his success." Even Chloe, influenced by weeks of systematic manipulation, began to question my motives and memories. "Mom Linda," she said with painful uncertainty, "Aunt Brenda says you hurt Daddy. Is it true you're being mean to his family?" The systematic destruction of our relationship was perhaps the cruelest aspect of their campaign. They were using my love for Chloe as a weapon against both of us, forcing her to choose between the woman who had raised her and the biological family that claimed to represent her father's wishes. But the final insult came when Brenda, through Mr. Davies, proposed what she called a reasonable settlement to resolve our situation. The terms were breathtaking in their calculated cruelty. "Mrs. Linda," Mr. Davies announced during a formal meeting in our living room, "my clients are prepared to offer you a generous resolution to this unfortunate situation. If you immediately sign over the deed to this house currently valued at $500,000 to Arthur's estate, which will be administered by his sister Brenda, and if you publicly confess to financial mismanagement that contributed to Arthur's debt crisis, then my clients will graciously agree not to file criminal charges for child abuse and will allow you to visit Chloe twice per year under strict supervision." The proposal was designed to strip me of my home, my reputation, and my dignity, while reducing my relationship with the daughter I had raised to the status of a distant relative with supervised visitation rights. It was extortion, disguised as generosity, cruelty, masquerading as mercy. "Let me understand this correctly," I said, my voice growing stronger as my teaching instincts kicked in. "You want me to give up my home, to pay debts I didn't incur, confess to crimes I didn't commit, and accept that the child I've raised for 3 years no longer belongs in my life?" Brenda's smile was triumphant and malicious. "Those are very reasonable terms for someone in your position. You should be grateful we're offering you anything at all. Most child abusers don't get visitation rights." As I looked around the home I had created with my life savings at the art projects Chloe and I had worked on together, at the photographs chronicling 3 years of genuine love and happiness, I realized that these people would never stop until they had destroyed everything beautiful we had built together. But they had made one crucial mistake. They assumed that grief and shock had destroyed my ability to think strategically and document evidence. They believed that a retired art teacher would be no match for their coordinated campaign of legal and emotional warfare. They were about to learn just how wrong they were. The final assault on our family came with the cold efficiency of a military operation designed to leave no avenue of escape or resistance. Brenda and Arthur's extended family had spent weeks laying the groundwork for what they clearly saw as their ultimate victory: the complete destruction of my relationship with Chloe and my ability to provide her with any stability or protection. The legal papers were served on a Friday morning by a stern-faced social worker accompanied by 2 police officers. Brenda had obtained an emergency temporary custody order for Chloe based on a carefully constructed file of allegations that painted me as an abusive stepmother who posed an immediate danger to a vulnerable child. "Ma'am," the social worker said, with professional detachment, "we have a court order requiring the immediate removal of the minor child Chloe from your custody pending investigation of abuse allegations. You need to step aside and allow us to do our job." Chloe stood frozen in our kitchen, still wearing her pajamas, her eyes wide with terror and confusion as she tried to understand why uniformed strangers were invading our home. She looked back and forth between me and the officials, searching for some explanation that would make sense of this nightmare. "What's happening?" she whispered, her voice breaking with fear. "Mom, Linda, what's happening? Why are they here?" I tried to move toward her to offer some comfort or reassurance, but the police officers stepped between us with the practiced efficiency of people who had dealt with similar situations countless times. "You need to stay back, ma'am," one officer said firmly. "Don't make this harder than it needs to be." Brenda arrived moments later, her face flushed with triumph and vindictive satisfaction. She had clearly orchestrated this entire scene, timing it for maximum emotional impact and ensuring that Chloe would witness my apparent powerlessness to protect her. "Don't worry, sweetheart," Brenda cooed to Chloe with false maternal warmth. "Aunt Brenda is here to take care of you. We're going to get you away from this bad woman who hurt your daddy." "She's just a child," I pleaded, my voice cracking with desperation. "How can you do this to her? You know I love her. You're destroying an innocent girl. Have you no humanity?" Brenda's response was swift and brutal, delivered with the malevolent satisfaction of someone who had been planning this moment for weeks. "You're a monster, Linda. This is what child abusers deserve. You drove my brother away with your greed and manipulation, and now you're going to lose everything. You lose the house. You lose the girl. You lose any chance of a decent life." As a social worker began gently but firmly leading Chloe toward the door, my heart shattered into pieces that I knew could never be reassembled. This beautiful child who had called me Mom Linda for 3 years, who had shared her dreams and fears with me, who had filled my life with purpose and joy, was being torn away based on vicious, fabricated lies. "Mom Linda," Chloe cried out, reaching for me as she was guided toward the waiting car. "I don't want to go. I want to stay with you. Please don't let them take me." The anguish in her voice was unbearable, but the officers held me back as I tried to reach for her. I could only watch helplessly as the most important person in my life was driven away by people who saw her not as a child to be protected, but as a weapon to be used in their campaign of revenge. The legal assault continued even after Chloe was gone. Within hours, I received notice that our home was being seized by Arthur's creditors to satisfy his gambling debts. The house I had purchased with my own savings, the sanctuary I had created for our family, was now being claimed by strangers who had no connection to the love and memories that filled every room. The foreclosure process moved with frightening speed, clearly accelerated by legal maneuvers that Brenda had been planning long before Arthur's disappearance. Within a week, I found myself standing in the empty shell of what had been our home, my possessions either seized by creditors or taken by Arthur's family as part of his estate. Brenda's final communication was a text message that arrived as I packed the few personal items I was allowed to keep. "Consider this closed, Linda. You tried to steal our family's money and abuse our child, but justice has been served. Arthur is at peace now knowing that Chloe is safe from you. Don't contact us again, ever. But even this devastation paled in comparison to what happened during my one brief supervised visit with Chloe 2 weeks later. The girl who had once run to me with excitement and affection now looked at me with fear and confusion, her innocent mind poisoned by weeks of systematic manipulation. "Aunt Brenda says you hurt Daddy," she said quietly, unable to meet my eyes. "She says that's why he had to go away." "Did you really hurt him, Mom Linda?" The careful coaching was evident in every word. Chloe had been taught to doubt not just my character, but her own memories of our life together. The thousands of moments of love, laughter, and shared joy had been reinterpreted as evidence of manipulation and abuse. In the desolate silence of a cheap motel room that had become my temporary shelter, I found myself confronting the most painful secret of my life, a truth that made Brenda's accusations of child abuse feel like the cruelest twist of cosmic irony. Chloe's biological mother, Arthur's first wife, Sarah, had not died from the sudden illness that everyone believed had taken her life. The truth was far more tragic and complex than the sanitized version Arthur had shared with his family and community. Sarah had suffered from severe, untreated postpartum depression following Chloe's birth, a condition that Arthur had refused to acknowledge or address due to his own shame and denial. The mental health crisis had deepened over months, leading to increasingly desperate behavior and a complete breakdown of her ability to care for herself or her infant daughter. On a cold February night, while Arthur was traveling for business and baby Chloe was staying with a babysitter, Sarah had taken her own life in a moment of overwhelming despair and confusion. Arthur had found her when he returned home, along with a heartbreaking note expressing her love for Chloe and her belief that they would both be better off without her. Arthur, consumed by guilt and shame, had begged me to help him conceal the true circumstances of Sarah's death. He feared that the stigma of suicide would follow Chloe throughout her life, that she would blame herself for her mother's despair, that his own family would question his fitness as a father. Together, we had meticulously crafted a false narrative of sudden illness, enlisting the help of a sympathetic doctor who agreed to modify the death certificate and create medical records that supported our story. I had sacrificed my own ethical standards as an educator, risking my career and my integrity to protect a little girl from the traumatic truth about her mother's final moments. For 3 years, I had carried this devastating secret, watching Chloe grow up, believing that her mother had loved her enough to fight for life, rather than knowing that depression had stolen her mother's ability to see hope or feel connection. I had helped create and maintain a loving fiction designed to protect an innocent child from unbearable truth. Now, as Brenda accused me of child abuse and manipulation, the irony was staggering. The woman who had sacrificed her own moral clarity to protect Chloe from trauma was being destroyed by people who were actively traumatizing her for their own vengeful purposes. Every lie I had told to protect Chloe's emotional well-being was being used as evidence of my untrustworthiness. Every sacrifice I had made to preserve her father's reputation was being twisted into proof of my manipulative nature. The love that had motivated my most difficult ethical compromises was being redefined as the selfishness of a gold-digging stepmother. As I sat alone in that motel room, homeless and separated from the child I had raised as my own daughter, I realized that my secret keeping had not protected our family. It had made us vulnerable to people who understood that the truth, once twisted, could become the most devastating weapon of all. Brenda and her allies had succeeded in stripping away my home, my financial security, and my relationship with Chloe, but they had also inadvertently revealed their own cruelty and greed in ways that could be documented and exposed. I was 60 years old, homeless, and branded as a child abuser by my own stepdaughter's family. But I was also a retired teacher who had spent 30 years protecting children from exactly this kind of manipulation and abuse. The time had come to stop protecting Arthur's secrets and start protecting the daughter who still needed me, whether she knew it or not. The weeks following my expulsion from Chloe's life blurred into a nightmare of psychological torment that threatened to consume what remained of my sanity. I found myself trapped in a terrifying abyss of isolation, carrying the crushing weight of Sarah's true death, a secret that had haunted me for 3 years and now felt like poison spreading through my veins. Arthur's family, led by Brenda's relentless campaign, actively reinforced the narrative of child abuse throughout our community. They had transformed my love for Chloe into evidence of manipulation, my financial sacrifices into proof of gold-digging schemes, and my protective instincts into signs of controlling behavior. The public accusations of being an abusive stepmother began to make me question everything I thought I knew about myself. Had I been too involved in Chloe's emotional life? Had my efforts to create stability somehow damaged her development? The doubt gnawed at me with relentless persistence, eroding my sense of reality and purpose. I would wake at 3 a.m, replaying every interaction I'd had with Chloe, wondering if I had somehow failed to see signs of my own harmful behavior. The weight of Sarah's concealed suicide, combined with the systematic destruction of my reputation, made me question my own memories, my own choices, my very sanity. The professional assault on my character escalated when Brenda launched a coordinated campaign to destroy what remained of my teaching reputation. She began making carefully worded phone calls to public school, art teacher networks, and community art organizations, expressing concern about my mental state and my fitness to work with children. "We're worried about Linda," Brenda would say in conversations with my former colleagues. "Her family has noticed increasing confusion and inappropriate emotional attachments to students. She's been making wild accusations about family members and showing clear signs of cognitive decline. It's quite tragic, really, watching such a dedicated teacher end her career this way." The sophisticated nature of her campaign was breathtaking. Brenda had clearly researched my professional background and identified exactly which relationships and reputations to target for maximum damage. She subtly implied that my erratic behavior raised questions about my past interactions with students and my ability to maintain appropriate boundaries with children. The impact was swift and devastating. Within weeks, I received quiet cancellations from art groups I had belonged to for decades. Invitations to local art events were withdrawn. Former colleagues who had once sought my guidance on difficult students stopped returning my calls. My reputation for gentle teaching and artistic integrity, built over 30 years of dedicated service, was systematically destroyed by whispered implications of mental instability and inappropriate behavior. The financial consequences were equally catastrophic. Brenda had somehow managed to have my bank accounts frozen by reporting suspicious activity to financial authorities, claiming she was concerned about my ability to manage my own finances. The legal fees from defending myself against the fabricated child abuse claims drained what little savings I could still access. Most devastatingly, Arthur's gambling debts, $800,000 that I had never known existed, were now being pursued against me personally. Despite the fact that I had no legal responsibility for debts I hadn't incurred, the creditors and their lawyers were using every intimidation tactic available to force me into financial ruin. Within 2 months, I was forcibly evicted from the home I had created with my life savings. I watched helplessly as my possessions, my art supplies, my teaching materials, my family photographs were sold at a public auction to cover mounting debts that weren't even mine. I was rendered homeless, stripped of my dignity and self-reliance, forced to seek shelter in a crowded, impersonal public facility where I shared a room with 3 other displaced women. The transition from respected teacher to homeless woman happened with such speed that I could barely process the magnitude of my fall. But the cruelest blow was yet to come, orchestrated by Brenda with a sophistication that revealed the true depths of her calculated malice. She organized what she called a child protection charity event designed to raise awareness about the signs of child abuse and the importance of speaking out against family members who pose a threat to children. The publicity materials featured Chloe as an example of a child who had found the courage to seek help and healing. My 14-year-old stepdaughter, the girl I had raised as my own daughter, stood at a podium delivering a rehearsed speech about overcoming past trauma and finding a safe space away from people who pretend to love you but really want to control you. Every word was carefully crafted to paint me as the abusive influence she had courageously escaped. Sometimes the people closest to us are the ones who hurt us most, Chloe said, her young voice carrying across the crowded community center. I learned that it's okay to tell the truth about adults who make you feel scared or confused, even when they say they love you. The audience nodded knowingly, many recognizing the subtle reference to my situation. I watched the live stream from a computer at the public library, my hands shaking as I witnessed my beloved stepdaughter being used as a weapon against me. But it was Chloe's final contribution that shattered what remained of my heart. She had created another drawing for the event, this one showing a happy family of stick figures gathered around a house with bright windows and a sunny sky. Once again, I wasn't in the picture. Where I should have been there was simply empty space, as if I had never existed in her life at all. The drawing was displayed prominently during her presentation, a visual representation, not just of my exclusion, but of my complete erasure from her narrative of family happiness. In my darkest hour, as I contemplated whether it might be easier to simply disappear entirely, an unexpected lifeline appeared. Mrs. Sarah Martinez, whose daughter I had taught art to 15 years earlier, reached out to me after seeing news coverage of my situation. "Ms. Linda," she said during our emotional phone call, "I remember what you did for my daughter Maria when she was struggling with self-confidence and artistic expression. You didn't just teach her technique, you helped her believe in herself as an artist and as a person. You changed her life, and you changed mine as a mother." Mrs. Martinez didn't just offer sympathy, she provided crucial financial support to help me continue fighting the legal battles that were destroying me. More importantly, she connected me with a network of parents whose children I had taught over the years, families who remembered my character and my dedication to nurturing young minds. Through their connections, I was introduced to a group of retired legal professionals who specialized in elder abuse and child custody cases, attorneys and social workers who recognized the sophisticated patterns of manipulation being used against me. "This isn't just about child custody," explained Janet Morrison, a retired family court judge who agreed to consult on my case. "This is about a systematic campaign to discredit and destroy you, using your love for a child as the primary weapon. We've seen this before, and we know how to fight it." For the first time in months, I felt something I had almost forgotten: hope. Not the naive hope of immediate reconciliation with Chloe, but the fierce professional hope of a teacher who understood that protecting children sometimes meant fighting the very people who claimed to have their best interests at heart. I was 60 years old, homeless, and branded as a child abuser by my own stepdaughter's family. But I was also a retired teacher with 30 years of experience in recognizing the difference between genuine child protection and sophisticated manipulation. Brenda and her allies had made one crucial mistake. They assumed that grief and isolation had destroyed my ability to think strategically and document evidence. They believed that a retired art teacher would be no match for their coordinated campaign of legal and emotional warfare. They were about to learn just how wrong they were. 6 months after my expulsion from Chloe's life, Brenda orchestrated what she called the ultimate vindication of her actions, a nationally publicized family healing through art exhibit that would forever change how I viewed the depths of human manipulation and cruelty. Using her growing network of child advocacy connections and her newfound platform as an expert on identifying family abuse, Brenda positioned herself as the featured speaker for an exhibition designed to help families recognize and recover from emotional trauma. The event was held at a prestigious art museum with attendance from child psychologists, family therapists, and social workers from across the country. The centerpiece of the exhibition was a collection of Chloe's artwork spanning the 3 years she had lived with me, pieces I had lovingly saved and displayed in our home, now confiscated as evidence during the custody proceedings. Brenda had carefully selected and reinterpreted these innocent childhood creations to support her narrative of hidden trauma and emotional abuse. Ladies and gentlemen, Brenda began her presentation, her voice carrying the authority of someone who had become a recognized expert in child trauma recovery. What you're about to see is a heartbreaking example of how children communicate their pain through art when they feel unable to speak their truth directly. She pointed to a drawing Chloe had made when she was 12, a simple crayon picture of our family standing in front of our house, all 3 of us smiling under a bright yellow sun. In my memory, it had been a joyful expression of belonging and happiness. In Brenda's interpretation, it became something sinister and disturbing. Notice the forced smiles, Brenda explained with practiced expertise. The rigid positioning of the figures, the way the child has drawn herself smaller than the adults, suggesting feelings of powerlessness and intimidation. This is classic visual evidence of a child who feels compelled to project happiness while experiencing internal distress. The audience of professionals nodded gravely, taking notes as Brenda systematically reinterpreted 3 years of Chloe's artistic expression through a lens of abuse and manipulation. Every painting, every drawing, every craft project we had worked on together was transformed into evidence of my harmful influence on her development. She presented another piece, a watercolor painting Chloe had created after a particularly challenging day at school, showing stormy clouds over a landscape with a single ray of sunlight breaking through. I remembered encouraging her to express her feelings about the difficult peer interactions she was navigating, helping her process her emotions through artistic creation. Here we see the child's unconscious representation of her home environment. Brenda continued her analysis. The dark, threatening storm clouds represent the emotional instability created by her stepmother's controlling behavior. The single ray of light suggests the child's desperate hope for escape or rescue. The perversion of my life's work was breathtaking in its calculated cruelty. Brenda had taken my most cherished memories of nurturing Chloe's creativity and twisted them into proof of psychological damage. She was using my own teaching methods, the very techniques that had helped hundreds of children express themselves safely over 3 decades, as evidence of my unfitness to care for children. The media coverage of the exhibition was extensive, with Brenda giving interviews about her breakthrough insights into recognizing family trauma through artistic expression. She positioned herself as a visionary advocate who had uncovered truth that other adults had missed, subtly mocking my professional expertise as either naive or deliberately blind to signs of abuse. The tragedy, Brenda told a television interviewer, is that the very adult who should have been protecting this child was the source of her emotional distress. Sometimes the people we trust most to nurture our children's creativity are actually using that trust to mask deeper problems. I learned about the exhibition from Maria Martinez, the former student whose mother had become one of my advocates. She called me at the shelter, her voice filled with outrage and disbelief as she described what she had seen on the news. I managed to watch portions of the exhibition's live stream from the public library, sitting at a computer terminal in my donated clothes, witnessing my life's work being systematically perverted for public consumption. The sight of Brenda smiling confidently as she presented my relationship with Chloe as a cautionary tale of unrecognized abuse was an unbearable psychological torment. But the most devastating moment came when my own grandson, Ethan, appeared in a pre-recorded video segment designed to support Brenda's presentation. My 16-year-old grandson, whom I had taught to paint and encouraged in his own artistic pursuits, spoke with coach sincerity about his newfound emotional freedom. "I've learned so much about healthy boundaries in families," Ethan said, looking directly into the camera with earnest conviction. "Sometimes adults can be too controlling in the name of love, and it takes courage to recognize when family relationships aren't actually healthy, even when they seem caring on the surface." Every word was a knife in my heart. This was the boy I had spent countless hours with, teaching him color theory and perspective, encouraging his creativity, while helping him process his parents' divorce. Now, he was publicly endorsing a philosophy that branded my nurturing as manipulation and my love as control. But it was during a live segment of the exhibition that something happened that gave me the first glimpse of hope I'd felt in months. Chloe was brought on camera to discuss her current artwork and her healing journey, but something was different about her demeanor. While Brenda spoke about Chloe's remarkable recovery and her ability to move beyond past trauma, I noticed something that my trained eye as an art teacher couldn't ignore. As Chloe sat quietly beside her aunt, she began unconsciously drawing on a piece of paper with a pencil someone had given her. To most viewers, it would have looked like random doodling, but to me, it was clearly recognizable. She was drawing the same flower pattern we had worked on together in our kitchen, a design that had become our secret symbol for everything is okay during the difficult early days of blending our family. The drawing lasted only a few seconds before Brenda noticed and quickly pulled Chloe away from the camera, but it was enough. My beloved stepdaughter was sending me a coded message, a desperate plea for help hidden in the artistic language we had developed together. The exhibition continued for 3 days, with Brenda building a national platform based on the systematic destruction of my reputation and the distortion of my relationship with Chloe. She received consulting offers from child protection agencies, speaking invitations from family therapy organizations, and media requests from networks looking to cover her breakthrough insights into family dynamics. My lifetime of dedication to nurturing children's creativity had been transformed into her career opportunity. But Chloe's brief secret drawing had revealed something crucial. Beneath all the coaching and manipulation, the little girl I had raised still remembered who I really was. She was still fighting, still trying to communicate, still hoping for rescue. The exhibition had been Brenda's triumph, but it had also provided me with evidence of Chloe's true feelings and Brenda's willingness to exploit a child's trauma for personal gain. Her success contained the seeds of her eventual downfall, if only I could find the strength and resources to expose the truth. I was 60 years old, homeless, and watching my life's work being perverted for profit. But I was also a teacher who understood that the most important lessons often came disguised as the most painful experiences. The time for passive suffering was over. The time for strategic action had begun. Brenda's assault on my remaining resources came with the methodical precision of someone who had studied every vulnerability and planned every attack with surgical care. Having established her credibility as a national expert on child trauma and family healing, she now possessed the platform and connections necessary to deliver the killing blow that would erase me completely from existence. The final financial barrage began with a lawsuit so comprehensive and devastating that it took my breath away when the papers were served. Brenda was suing me for $1 million in emotional distress damages, claiming that my systematic abuse of Chloe had caused the entire family severe psychological trauma and forced them to seek expensive therapy and legal intervention. The lawsuit alleged that my manipulative behavior and inappropriate attachment to Chloe had created a hostile family environment that threatened the child's mental health and development. According to the filing, my refusal to accept appropriate boundaries and my attempts to alienate Chloe from her biological family had made it impossible for them to provide normal care and guidance. But the lawsuit was just the opening move in a coordinated attack that demonstrated the full scope of Brenda's strategic planning. While I struggled to find affordable legal representation for the civil case, she launched a parallel assault on my professional standing and financial security. Brenda contacted my former school district and retirement fund administrators with deep concern about my mental competence and my fitness to have ever worked with children. Her carefully crafted communications suggested that my recent erratic behavior and inappropriate relationships with students' families raised questions about my past conduct and my ability to have maintained professional boundaries throughout my career. My family is concerned that Linda's mental deterioration may have been affecting her judgment with students for years, Brenda wrote in a formal complaint to the Educational Conduct Board. We're worried that her inappropriate emotional attachments and manipulative tendencies might have compromised her interactions with vulnerable children throughout her teaching career. The bureaucratic machinery moved with frightening efficiency. Within weeks, my teacher's pension was permanently revoked, along with all professional honors I had earned over 30 years of distinguished service. The official letters cited serious concerns about professional conduct and current mental fitness issues that retroactively call into question past educational performance. I was now completely destitute, with no income, no savings, no home, and mounting legal debts that grew larger every day. The 40 years of careful financial planning I had done for my retirement were destroyed in a matter of months by a system designed to protect children, but weaponized against me by my stepdaughter's family. The forced eviction from my temporary shelter accommodation was deliberately timed for maximum humiliation. Brenda had been monitoring my living situation through her growing network of social connections, and she ensured that local news cameras would be present when I was removed from the building. The footage was devastating. A 60-year-old woman who had once commanded respect in a classroom, now standing on a sidewalk with her few remaining possessions stuffed into garbage bags, looking confused and defeated as she tried to figure out where to go next. The news story that accompanied the footage painted me as a cautionary tale about the dangers of unrecognized mental illness and the tragic consequences of family conflict. Former teacher loses everything in custody dispute, the headline read. Family members say they tried to help, but she refused all assistance. My own children, Mark and Lisa, maintained their chilling indifference throughout my public disgrace. When contacted by reporters for comment, Mark issued a brief statement that cut deeper than any legal document. My mother made her choices. She had multiple opportunities to resolve this situation peacefully, but she chose conflict over compromise. I have no legal or moral obligation to support someone who has consistently refused help and chosen to alienate her own family. Lisa reinforced Mark's narrative through carefully crafted social media posts about her busy schedule and exciting new projects, subtly implying that she was too focused on positive developments to get involved in the drama surrounding me. Their ability to look through me as if I were invisible when we occasionally crossed paths in town confirmed their complete emotional abandonment. But it was Brenda's final act of calculated cruelty that revealed the true depths of her malice. Using funds that she had somehow obtained from Arthur's estate money that should have been used to pay his gambling debts, but had apparently been redirected through legal maneuvers, I couldn't understand. She purchased a luxury child advocacy center and dedicated it to Chloe's healing journey. The custom-built facility cost over $300,000 and was designed as a therapeutic center for children recovering from family trauma and abuse. The dedication ceremony was publicized throughout the region, with Brenda giving interviews about the importance of transforming tragedy into hope and creating safe spaces for children who have survived family violence. This center represents Chloe's incredible strength and resilience. Brenda told the local newspaper during the ribbon-cutting ceremony, instead of letting her stepmother's abuse define her future, she's chosen to help other children who have faced similar challenges. This is what real healing looks like. The photos from the event were shared widely on social media, showing Brenda and Chloe smiling as they unveiled a plaque dedicating the center to courage in the face of family betrayal. Every image was a brutal reminder that my life savings and Arthur's estate were being used to create a monument to lies about my character. The irony was staggering. Money that should have paid gambling debts was instead being used to build a facility that would teach other families to reject the very principles of love and sacrifice that I had spent my life defending. The relentless psychological and financial siege finally broke my body in ways that my mind had somehow managed to resist. On a cold December morning, while walking to a job interview at a local grocery store, I collapsed on the sidewalk with what the emergency room doctors later diagnosed as a massive stress-induced heart attack. I lay unconscious for 3 days, my life hanging by a thread in the charity ward of the county hospital. The medical staff told me later that no family members had come to visit. No one had called to check on my condition. I was simply another indigent patient whose emergency contact information led to voicemail boxes that were never returned. But during those dark hours of unconsciousness, something remarkable happened in the depths of my compromised consciousness. Buried memories began to surface, fragments of a counseling session I had facilitated 20 years earlier that I had somehow suppressed or forgotten in the chaos of recent events. The session had involved a family where one parent was systematically manipulating authorities and extended family members to gain custody of children while destroying the reputation of the other parent. I remembered the calculating coldness, the sophisticated lies, the way the manipulative parent had used the children's own words against their targeted victim. In my dreamlike state, I saw Brenda's face superimposed over the memory of that long-ago parent, and I realized with stunning clarity that I wasn't just the victim of random cruelty. I was being destroyed by someone who had perfected the exact techniques I had once professionally identified as psychological abuse. The patterns were identical: the systematic isolation, the financial destruction, the use of children as weapons, the perversion of protective systems into tools of persecution. Brenda wasn't just cruel, she was implementing a sophisticated playbook for destroying targeted family members. As I lay in that hospital bed, barely alive and completely alone, I realized that my professional knowledge wasn't just relevant to my situation, it was the key to my survival. I might be homeless, abandoned, and branded as mentally unstable, but I was also a teacher who understood exactly how these manipulation tactics worked and exactly how they could be exposed. I was 60 years old and had lost everything except the one thing that mattered most: my understanding of how to protect children from the very people who claimed to love them most. My recovery from the heart attack was slow and painful, but it gave me something I hadn't had in months' time to think clearly, without the constant barrage of crisis and manipulation. The recovered memories of that 20-year-old counseling case had crystallized into a plan, a final attempt to reach whatever love might still exist in Chloe's heart beneath the layers of coaching and fear. The parallels between that old case and my current situation were too precise to be coincidental. I began to suspect that Brenda hadn't just stumbled upon these manipulation tactics. She had studied them, perhaps even researching cases I had handled to learn how sophisticated family destruction actually worked. With the help of Jennifer, my compassionate nurse, who had become my only reliable ally in the hospital, I managed to record a video message from my bed. Despite my obvious frailty and the toll that recent months had taken on my appearance, I spoke with the clarity and conviction that had once made me an effective teacher. The 20-minute recording was unlike anything I had ever created. Instead of accusations or pleas, I simply presented the truth. I played audio recordings I had made during family meetings, conversations where Brenda had privately admitted her plans to get that girl away from her toxic influence, and her calculations about how to make sure Linda loses everything. "Chloe, my darling girl," I said, looking directly into the camera with all the love a mother could convey. "I want you to hear Brenda's own words, her own voice speaking the truth about what this has really been about. I want you to remember the woman who taught you to paint, who held you when you cried about missing your mother, who would have done anything to protect you from pain." I also revealed something that I had never told anyone: the truth about Sarah's death and the sacrifice I had made to protect Chloe from that traumatic knowledge. I explained how her father and I had created a loving fiction to shield her from the reality of her mother's postpartum depression and suicide, and how that protective lie was now being used as evidence of my dishonesty. "Your mother didn't die from a sudden illness, sweetheart," I said gently, knowing that this truth might hurt her, but believing she deserved to know. "She was struggling with a terrible sadness after you were born, and your father was too ashamed to get her the help she needed. I helped him create a story that would protect you from that pain, but now Brenda is using my willingness to keep that secret as proof that I'm untrustworthy. The recording was my last desperate attempt to awaken some recognition of truth in Chloe's heart, to remind her of the woman who had truly loved her versus the people who were using her pain for their own purposes. But I had underestimated the sophistication of the surveillance network that had been monitoring my every move. Jennifer, exhausted from her long shifts and genuinely concerned about family healing, had agreed to deliver the video message directly to Chloe's school. But Brenda had been cultivating relationships with hospital staff for months, occasionally bringing small gifts and expressing concern about my mental state to employees who had access to my room. When Jennifer left the hospital with my video, she was intercepted in the parking lot by Brenda, who convinced her that she was deeply worried about Chloe's emotional state and wanted to preview the message to ensure it wouldn't cause additional trauma. "I know Linda means well," Brenda told Jennifer with practiced sincerity, "but she's been saying some very disturbing things lately. I just want to make sure this message won't make Chloe's recovery more difficult. Our family has been through so much already." Jennifer, genuinely believing she was helping to protect a vulnerable child, handed over the video to Brenda without knowing she was giving it to the very person who had orchestrated my destruction. What happened next was a masterpiece of digital manipulation and media exploitation that destroyed any remaining hope I had for justice or reconciliation. Brenda took my raw emotional video and subjected it to sophisticated editing techniques that transformed my message of truth into apparent evidence of mental instability and manipulative behavior. She altered audio levels to make my voice sound more strained and disconnected, added subtle background noise during key statements that suggested paranoid delusions, and carefully spliced segments to change the context and meaning of my words. My earnest revelation about Sarah's suicide became evidence of my willingness to traumatize a child with fabricated stories about her mother. My documented recordings of Brenda's manipulation became fabricated evidence created by a confused old woman. My love for Chloe became obsessive behavior designed to control her life from a distance. Most devastatingly, Brenda sold this heavily doctored video to a national gossip news channel as an exclusive story about elder mental health and family dynamics. The segment was titled, "When Love Becomes Obsession, A Teacher's Desperate Lies Exposed," and it portrayed me as a textbook case of age-related paranoia combined with inappropriate attachment to students. Dr. Amanda Rodriguez, a television psychologist who had never met me, provided expert commentary that pathologized everything I had said and done. What we're seeing here is a classic case of elderly narcissism combined with delusional thinking, she explained to the national audience. The subject has created an elaborate fantasy to avoid accepting responsibility for her own inappropriate behavior and the natural consequences of crossing professional boundaries. The edited video made me appear delusional and potentially dangerous. My carefully documented evidence was presented as either fabricated or misunderstood due to my mental deterioration. The truth about Sarah's death was dismissed as either a cruel lie designed to manipulate Chloe or a confused memory created by my declining cognitive state. But the killing blow came when Chloe appeared on the program for what was billed as an exclusive interview about surviving inappropriate adult relationships. My stepdaughter sat in the television studio looking beautiful and composed, wearing a dress I had bought her for her last birthday. She spoke with the measured tones of a young woman who had been carefully coached to discuss a traumatic situation with appropriate emotional distance. "It's really sad to watch someone you once cared about lose touch with reality," Chloe said, her voice carrying a maturity that seemed far beyond her 14 years. "Linda was always very intense about our relationship, always trying to make me feel like she was more important in my life than my real family. Now I understand that wasn't love, it was something unhealthy. The interviewer nodded sympathetically. How do you maintain compassion for someone while protecting yourself from their harmful behavior? You have to set boundaries, Chloe replied with coached wisdom. You have to accept that sometimes adults who seem caring are actually trying to control you. It's hard, but you can't let one person's problems destroy your whole family's peace. Then she brought my grandson Ethan onto the program, the 17-year-old boy I had taught to appreciate art and creativity, now speaking about his concern for my welfare and his family's attempts to help me get professional treatment. I love my step-grandmother, Ethan said, with practiced sincerity that broke my heart. But I've had to accept that the person making these accusations isn't really her anymore. We just want her to be safe and get the help she needs. Mark and Lisa appeared in a separate segment, offering subtle nods of agreement and expressions of shared concern that publicly reinforced Brenda's narrative while positioning themselves as the reasonable family members caught in an impossible situation. The program reached millions of viewers nationwide, cementing my reputation as a cautionary tale about the dangers of untreated mental illness in elderly family members. Social media comments range from sympathy for my condition to praise for my family's mature handling of a tragic situation. I watched the broadcast from my hospital bed, feeling as though I was witnessing my own public execution. Every word I had spoken, in love and desperation, had been twisted into evidence of my instability. My stepdaughter, the child I had protected from the truth about her mother's death, was now publicly diagnosing me as mentally ill for a national audience. But even in my darkest moment of complete despair, help was coming from an unexpected source. Carol Thompson, Chloe's former elementary school counselor, who had worked with me during those early days of blending our family, had been watching the broadcast with growing horror. She had witnessed firsthand my genuine love for Chloe and Arthur's increasingly erratic behavior as his gambling addiction spiraled out of control. Ms. Thompson contacted the small legal team that Mrs. Martinez had helped me assemble, offering her professional notes and observations from the 3 years she had worked with our family. Her meticulous documentation told a completely different story than the one being presented on television. Linda was one of the most nurturing, appropriate caregivers I ever worked with, her professional assessment stated. Her relationship with Chloe was healthy, boundaried, and genuinely loving. If anyone in that family was displaying concerning behavior, it was Arthur, whose mood swings and financial secrecy created real instability for the child. As I lay in that hospital bed, reading Ms. Thompson's report, I realized that my family's public betrayal had inadvertently created a documentary record of their manipulation and cruelty. Their arrogance and greed had led them to expose their own tactics in ways that could be used against them. They had stolen my voice and used it as a weapon against me. But in doing so, they had revealed the true nature of their conspiracy and their willingness to traumatize a child for personal gain. The war was entering its final phase, and for the first time in months, I wasn't fighting alone. 8 months after my near-death experience in the hospital, I stood before the federal courthouse in downtown Philadelphia, surrounded by a legal team that would have been unthinkable during my darkest days. An unexpected windfall from the sale of a rare art piece I had documented and authenticated years earlier, combined with Mrs. Martinez's generous support and donations from other former students' families, had provided the resources I needed to hire the most formidable alliance imaginable. Janet Morrison, the retired family court judge, Dr. Patricia Williams, a forensic psychologist who specialized in parental alienation cases, Carol Thompson, Chloe's former school counselor, whose professional notes would prove crucial, and Michael Steinberg, an aggressive elder abuse attorney whose reputation for destroying inheritance fraud was legendary. Together, they represented everything Brenda and her conspirators had never imagined they would face. We were launching a massive federal, civil, and criminal lawsuit against Brenda and Mark for child abuse, elder abuse, financial fraud, and national defamation. The case had attracted international attention, with legal scholars calling it a landmark battle against sophisticated family manipulation and media exploitation of children. But the global attention wasn't what mattered to me. What mattered was the collection of audio recordings that I had been capturing through my home security system recordings that would finally reveal the truth about Brenda's character and her systematic plan to destroy my relationship with Chloe. The courtroom was packed beyond capacity, with overflow seating arranged for the hundreds of journalists, legal professionals, and child advocates who had come to witness this reckoning. Cameras from major networks captured every moment as Judge Morrison stood to present our evidence. Your Honor, she began addressing Federal Judge Catherine Hayes, who was presiding over the case. We are here today not just to seek justice for Ms. Linda, but to expose a conspiracy that represents one of the most sophisticated and cruel forms of child manipulation and elder abuse we have ever encountered. The first recording we played sent shockwaves through the silent courtroom. It was Brenda's voice captured during one of her visits to my home when she thought she was having a private conversation with Mark in my living room. The old hag thinks she'll keep that girl forever. Brenda's voice echoed through the speakers with chilling clarity. We need to get Mark to completely avoid his mother and make sure she understands she's toxic. If we play this right, we can clear Arthur's $800,000 debt using her assets and get custody of Chloe at the same time. The courtroom erupted in murmurs of shock and disgust, but Michael Steinberg wasn't finished. The next recording featured Brenda giving explicit instructions about how to manipulate both me and Chloe for maximum emotional damage. The key is making Linda feel like she's losing her mind. Brenda's voice revealed with calculated cruelty. We coach Chloe to question her memories. We get Mark to act like his mother is unstable, and we make sure everyone in town thinks she's an abusive stepmother. Once her reputation is destroyed, we can do whatever we want. But it was the third recording that shattered any remaining illusions about Brenda's humanity. In this conversation with Mark, she discussed their long-term strategy with the casual indifference of someone planning a business transaction. The beautiful thing about this plan, Brenda explained to her husband, is that we get rid of Linda permanently and gain access to all of Arthur's remaining assets. Once we have Chloe, we can control her inheritance from her father, and Linda will be too broken to fight back. If we're lucky, all this stress will kill the old woman and our problems will be solved permanently. Mark's voice joined the conversation, revealing his own willing participation in my destruction. I can't believe I'm saying this about my own mother, but you're right. She's always been too controlling, too focused on that girl. Maybe it's time she learned what real consequences look like. The silence in the courtroom was deafening. Reporters scribbled frantically, cameras captured every emotion on the faces of the defendants, and I watched as the public finally heard the truth I had been trying to tell for over a year. When Dr. Black, the expert witness Brenda had hired to provide professional testimony about my supposed mental instability, was called to testify, he attempted to maintain his facade of professional authority. But when confronted with the undeniable evidence of his fabricated reports and his financial relationship with Brenda, his composure crumbled completely. I was paid to say she was mentally unstable. He confessed, his voice breaking with shame. Mrs. Brenda gave me specific talking points and promised me additional consulting work if I supported her custody case. I fabricated psychological assessments I never conducted and provided expert testimony based on lies. I've destroyed my own career for money. His confession sent ripples of horror through the professional community watching the proceedings, and his medical license would be permanently revoked within hours. But it was Brenda's testimony that provided the most devastating and heartbreaking moment of the entire trial. When she was called to the witness stand and forced to listen to her own recorded words, something inside her finally broke. The confident, manipulative woman who had built a national platform on my destruction became a sobbing, incoherent figure, overwhelmed by the magnitude of her cruelty and the irreversible ruin of her reputation. I just wanted what was best for the family. She wept, her carefully constructed persona collapsing before the eyes of the world. Arthur left us with so many problems, and Linda was always so possessive of Chloe. I thought if we could just get her out of the way, everything would be better. The sight of her complete breakdown was profoundly heartbreaking, not because I felt sympathy for her suffering, but because I realized how completely her greed and jealousy had destroyed any capacity for genuine human connection. Mark's testimony was even more devastating. When he was called to face the evidence of his participation in my destruction, he suffered his own profound psychological collapse. The man who had publicly abandoned his mother to support his wife's lies became a broken figure, shaking uncontrollably as he faced the magnitude of his betrayal. I convinced myself that Mom was the problem. He sobbed, his voice barely audible. Brenda made it seem like protecting Chloe from Linda was the right thing to do. I never stopped to think about what we were doing to my own mother, how we were destroying an innocent woman who had done nothing but love us. But the most powerful moment of the entire trial came when Chloe was called to testify. My 14-year-old stepdaughter entered the courtroom looking small and frightened, but as she heard the audio recordings of Brenda's manipulation and witnessed the collapse of the adults who had coached her, something awakened in her eyes. The truth of my unwavering love and Brenda's monstrous lies hit her with devastating force. She broke down completely, rushing from the witness stand to where I sat in the gallery, collapsing into my arms with the desperate relief of a child who had finally been freed from a terrible nightmare. "Mom, Linda, I'm so sorry," she sobbed against my shoulder, her whole body shaking with the intensity of her grief and relief. I knew something was wrong, but they kept telling me you were dangerous, that you didn't really love me. I drew that flower because I remembered our signal, because I hoped you would know I still loved you. As I held my stepdaughter in my arms for the first time in over a year, feeling her tears soak through my blouse and her small hands clutching desperately at my back, I understood that this moment of reunion was worth every second of pain I had endured. The courtroom fell completely silent as the cameras captured this profound reconciliation between a mother and daughter who had been cruelly separated by people who claimed to love them both. The trial lasted 3 weeks, but the verdict was never in doubt. The evidence was overwhelming, the recordings irrefutable, and the conspiracy so thoroughly documented that the defendants had no realistic defense. As Michael Steinberg returned to his seat, he looked at me with the respect and vindication I had been denied for so long. "Ms. Linda," he said quietly, "your courage in fighting this battle has not only restored your own family, but has exposed a pattern of child manipulation that will help protect countless other families from similar abuse." The courtroom erupted in applause, but I sat quietly with Chloe still in my arms, feeling the weight of 2 years of nightmare finally lifting from my shoulders. I had been vindicated, my integrity restored, my daughter returned to me. The war was over, and love had won. The court's verdict was delivered with a gravity that reflected the unprecedented nature of the crimes committed against me and Chloe. Federal Judge Hayes had heard enough evidence to understand that this case represented something far more serious than a simple family dispute. It was a sophisticated conspiracy that had nearly resulted in the permanent destruction of a mother-daughter relationship. Brenda received a sentence of 10 years in federal prison for elder abuse, financial fraud, child manipulation, and parental alienation. The judge noted that her actions represented a calculated assault on the most fundamental bonds of family love, combined with a predatory exploitation of a child's trust that strikes at the heart of what we mean when we speak of protecting children. Mark received 6 years for his complicity in the conspiracy and his active participation in my financial and emotional destruction. The judge observed that his betrayal of his own mother represented a particularly egregious violation of filial duty that enabled and amplified the primary perpetrator's cruelty. Mr. Davies, the debt collector, who had helped orchestrate the financial harassment, faced federal charges for fraudulent debt collection practices. Dr. Black's medical license was permanently revoked, and he faced criminal charges for perjury and professional misconduct. But the court's judgment went far beyond criminal convictions. Judge Hayes delivered a comprehensive statement that completely vindicated my character and dismantled the false narrative that had destroyed my life for 2 years. Ms. Linda represents the highest standards of educational integrity and maternal love, she declared from the bench. The evidence presented in this case demonstrates beyond any doubt that she was the victim of a sophisticated campaign of psychological manipulation and financial fraud. Her lifelong commitment to nurturing children and her unwavering dedication to protecting her stepdaughter stand in stark contrast to the greed and deception of those who attempted to destroy her. The financial restitution was substantial and comprehensive. The court ordered the return of all my stolen savings, plus damages for emotional distress, legal fees, and the professional reputation that had been destroyed. My home, which had been seized to pay Arthur's gambling debts, was restored to me, along with interest and compensation for the hardship of displacement. But more important than any financial settlement was the restoration of my relationship with Chloe and the beginning of a healing process that would transform both of our lives. The human cost of victory was staggering, but it also created opportunities for redemption that I had never thought possible. Brenda, imprisoned and financially ruined, sent me letters from federal prison that revealed the complete collapse of her psychological defenses. Her first letter arrived 3 months after her sentencing, written in barely legible handwriting that spoke to her mental deterioration. Linda, she wrote, I know you must hate me, and I understand why. I destroyed everything good in our family because I was consumed by jealousy and greed. I couldn't stand watching you succeed where I had failed, couldn't bear seeing Chloe love you the way she never loved me. I became a monster, and now I'm paying the price. Her letters continued to arrive sporadically, each one revealing more of the psychological damage she had inflicted on herself through her own cruelty. There was no redemption in these communications, no path toward forgiveness, only the rambling confessions of a woman who had finally understood the magnitude of her evil and found it unbearable. I read each letter with profound sadness, recognizing the waste of a life that could have been spent building rather than destroying, but her transformation came too late to undo the damage she had caused or to rebuild the relationships she had shattered. Mark's journey toward redemption began in a completely different way. 6 months after his sentencing, I received a letter from him that was unlike anything he had ever written to me before. It was raw, honest, and filled with a self-awareness that had been completely absent during the months of conflict. "Mom," he wrote from the federal correctional facility, "I know that saying I'm sorry is meaningless after what I've done. I know that my cowardice and my desperate need for Brenda's approval led me to betray the woman who gave me life and love for 38 years. I've been in therapy here, trying to understand how I became the kind of person who could participate in destroying his own mother." His letter continued for several pages, detailing his growing understanding of how Brenda's manipulation had exploited his own insecurities and his genuine fear of conflict. He acknowledged that his desperation to avoid confrontation had blinded him to the cruelty of his actions and the devastating impact they had on both me and Chloe. "I convinced myself that staying neutral was the safe choice," he wrote. "But I see now that my silence was a form of participation. I abandoned you when you needed me most, and I will carry that shame for the rest of my life." Mark's letters became a regular part of my life, arriving every 2 weeks with updates on his therapy, his growing understanding of his actions, and his commitment to becoming the man he should have been all along. While I couldn't yet envision a full reconciliation, his genuine remorse and his determination to change gave me hope that someday we might rebuild some form of relationship based on truth and mutual respect. But the greatest joy in the aftermath of the trial came from Chloe's complete embrace of our renewed relationship. She moved back in with me immediately after the verdict, dedicating herself to healing the trauma we had both endured and rebuilding the mother-daughter bond that had been so cruelly severed. Mom Linda. She said during one of our long evening conversations, "I need you to know that even when I was saying those terrible things about you, part of me always knew they weren't true. I kept drawing that flower because it was our secret signal, and I hoped somehow you would understand that I was still your daughter, no matter what they made me say." Chloe's commitment to healing was absolute and inspiring. She entered therapy to process the complex emotions of shame, confusion, and grief that came from recognizing how completely she had been manipulated. But more than that, she actively worked to rebuild our relationship with an intensity that spoke to her desperate need to make amends. We spent hours together working on art projects, talking about her real memories of our life together, and slowly rebuilding the trust that had been so systematically destroyed. She began calling me Mom again, not Mom Linda, as she had when she was younger, but simply Mom, a title that meant more to me than any legal document or court judgment. Ethan's healing was more gradual, but equally profound. My 17-year-old grandson, deeply traumatized by his parents' public downfall and the revelation of their cruelty, underwent intensive therapy to process the complex emotions of shame, confusion, and grief. When he finally came to see me 8 months after the trial ended, he was a different young man than the one who had publicly endorsed Brenda's lies about my character. "Grandma," he said, his voice filled with mature understanding that seemed far beyond his years. "I need to understand what really happened to our family. I need to know who you really are, not the person they told me you were." Ethan and I spent countless hours together, and I shared stories of his father's childhood, his step-aunt's slow descent into jealousy and greed, and the principles that had guided our family before it was torn apart by manipulation and lies. He began to understand that the controlling behavior he had been taught to see in me was actually the loving consistency of someone who put children's needs above adult convenience. As I sat in my restored home one evening, reading Mark's latest therapy letter, while Chloe prepared dinner in the kitchen and Ethan worked on a college application essay at my dining room table, I realized that justice had come at an enormous cost, but had also brought unexpected gifts. My family was forever changed. Brenda was broken by her own greed and malice. Mark was serving time for his betrayal, though he was working toward genuine redemption. But Chloe had been restored to me with a deeper understanding of love and loyalty than she had possessed before. Ethan was learning to think critically about family dynamics and manipulation. The truth had liberated us all, though the price had been almost unbearably high. I was no longer just a woman who had been vindicated by the courts. I was a mother who had fought for her daughter and won. 3 years after the trial that changed everything, I stand in my art studio, a bright, welcoming space I created in what used to be Arthur's home office, watching Chloe teach a painting technique to a group of local children whose families have been torn apart by manipulation and alienation. My home has been completely restored to its former warmth, but it's become something even more beautiful than it was before, a sanctuary where healing happens and love is rebuilt through patience, truth, and creative expression. The rooms that once echoed with Brenda's accusations and threats now ring with laughter, honest conversation, and the gentle sounds of a family that has been forged through fire and emerged stronger. Chloe, now 17 and preparing for college, has become not just my daughter, but my closest friend and partner in the advocacy work that has given new meaning to my life. She chose to stay with me throughout her high school years, actively choosing our relationship over the chaos and manipulation that had once defined her family experience. "You know what I tell people about our story, Mom," she said last week as we worked together on a community art project. "I tell them that real love isn't about control or manipulation. It's about creating a safe space where people can grow and make mistakes and still be accepted. You never tried to turn me against anyone. You just loved me and waited for me to find my way back home." Our relationship has deepened beyond anything I could have imagined during those early years of blending our family. We talk about everything: her dreams for college, her feelings about her father's abandonment, her complex emotions about forgiveness and family loyalty. She has become a remarkable young woman whose capacity for empathy and critical thinking was forged in the crucible of our shared trauma. The art studio has become a symbol of renewal and hope. I offer free classes for children and families dealing with parental alienation, using creative expression as a way to help them process complex emotions and rebuild damaged relationships. The walls are covered with paintings and drawings that tell stories of healing, recovery, and the rediscovery of truth. Ethan visits every weekend now, a freshman at college, studying psychology with a focus on family dynamics. His own healing journey has been remarkable to witness, from a confused teenager who had been coached to doubt his own perceptions to a thoughtful young man who understands the difference between healthy family relationships and manipulative ones. "Grandma, you saved me too," he told me recently. Not just from Brenda's lies, but from becoming the kind of person who chooses the easy path over the right one. Watching you fight for truth taught me that standing up for what's right is worth any amount of temporary discomfort. Mark's transformation has been slower, but no less genuine. His letters from prison have evolved from desperate apologies to thoughtful reflections on accountability, family dynamics, and the work of genuine redemption. He has completed multiple therapy programs and has begun facilitating support groups for other inmates dealing with family estrangement. Mom. His most recent letter read, "I'm learning that redemption isn't about earning forgiveness. It's about becoming someone worthy of the love you always gave me, even when I was too weak to deserve it. I may never be able to undo the damage I caused, but I can spend the rest of my life making sure other families don't go through what ours did." Our relationship remains cautious and distant, but it's built on honesty rather than the avoidance and enabling that had characterized our interactions for years. When he's released in 2 years, we'll have the foundation for something authentic, even if it's different from what we once had. The memoir I published 18 months ago, When Love is Used as a Weapon, A Stepmother's Fight for Truth, has become essential reading for family court professionals and parental alienation specialists. The book's success has allowed me to establish a foundation that provides legal assistance and therapeutic support to families dealing with similar manipulation and abuse. The speaking engagements take me around the country, sharing our story with audiences of parents, grandparents, and professionals who understand that family love can be weaponized by people who prioritize their own agenda over children's well-being. Each presentation is an opportunity to prevent other families from experiencing the devastation we endured. But the most meaningful work happens right here in my studio, with children who have been taught to doubt their own perceptions and parents who have been separated from children they love. We create art together, tell stories, and slowly rebuild the trust that manipulation has damaged. Brenda remains in federal prison, her appeals exhausted and her health deteriorating under the weight of her own guilt and isolation. Her final letter, received 6 months ago, was barely coherent, a rambling plea for forgiveness that revealed the complete collapse of her mental state. I feel no satisfaction in her suffering, only sadness for the waste of a life that could have been spent nurturing rather than destroying. She serves as a reminder that the choice to love or to manipulate is one we make every day, and the consequences of choosing cruelty extend far beyond the immediate victims. As I prepare for bed each evening in the home where Chloe and I have rebuilt our family, I feel a peace that I never thought possible during those dark months of separation and false accusations. The woman who once slept in a homeless shelter, branded as a child abuser by her own stepdaughter, now rests in her own comfortable bed, surrounded by evidence of authentic relationships and purposeful work. My professional legacy has been not just restored, but enhanced. The teaching principles I defended throughout my career have been vindicated, and my fight against my own family's manipulation has become a landmark case in parental alienation research. The phone rings, interrupting my evening reflections. It's Chloe calling from her dorm room to share news about her day and to confirm our plans for this weekend's art workshop. Her voice is bright with excitement and love, and I'm reminded once again that the greatest victories are often the most personal ones. As I turn off the lights and head upstairs, I pass the framed photograph of Chloe and me that holds the place of honor in my living room. We're both covered in paint from a project we completed last summer, laughing at some shared joke, our faces radiant with the joy of people who have found their way back to each other. "We did it, sweetheart," I whispered to the image. "We found our way home." 5 years have passed since Arthur's midnight flight changed my life forever. And as I sit in my sunlit kitchen this morning, watching Chloe prepare for her college graduation, while Ethan reviews graduate school applications at my dining room table, I'm struck by how completely my world has been transformed. The woman who once faced false accusations of child abuse in a cold, dark house with disconnected utilities now lives in radiant peace in the home where love has been redefined and rebuilt. My days are filled with the gentle rhythms of authentic family relationships, meaningful work as an advocate for targeted parents, and the quiet satisfaction of a life lived according to unshakable principles. The house around me tells the story of recovery and renewal. My art supplies line the shelves where they belong. My teaching awards hang on the walls with the dignity they deserve, and family photographs chronicle not just our history, but the journey from manipulation to truth that has defined these past years. Chloe's laughter fills the kitchen as she shares stories about her psychology internship, her voice carrying the confidence and moral clarity of a young woman who learned to choose authenticity over convenience. Ethan's voice joins hers as he describes his research on family systems and trauma recovery, the words of a young man who understands that healing requires courage and commitment to truth. Mark's weekly phone calls have become treasured connections built on his growing understanding of accountability and his commitment to becoming the father and son he should have been all along. Our relationship remains careful and honest, built on hope rather than assumption, but it grows stronger with each conversation, rooted in truth rather than avoidance. The greatest lesson of my ordeal has been this: love cannot be weaponized against those who understand its true nature. For months, I allowed Brenda's manipulation and society's false judgments to make me question my own worth and sanity. I nearly lost myself in the maze of their lies and accusations. But authentic love has a power that transcends human manipulation, and principles provide a foundation that cannot be shaken by external storms. I've learned that real family is not defined by blood relationships or legal documents, but by shared values and genuine commitment to each other's well-being. Carol Thompson, Janet Morrison, and the other members of my legal team have become my chosen family, bound together by our commitment to protecting children and our respect for each other's character. Mrs. Martinez and my former students' families have shown me that relationships built on nurturing and education can become sources of life-saving support when biological family fails. Most importantly, I've discovered that a life of purpose is always possible, regardless of age or circumstances. My work as an advocate for targeted parents has given new meaning to my expertise as an educator. The memoir that grew from my pain has become a beacon of hope for other families facing similar manipulation. The foundation I established ensures that my suffering will prevent similar anguish for countless others. To anyone facing similar battles to the parents who doubt their own worth, when children are turned against them, to the families torn apart by manipulation disguised as protection, I offer this promise: truth will ultimately prevail, love can overcome the most sophisticated lies, and authentic relationships can be rebuilt even after the most devastating betrayals. The spirit of unconditional love and an unwavering commitment to truth can triumph over even the most ruthless manipulation. Family bonds may be tested, but they cannot be permanently destroyed when they're built on genuine care rather than control. And sometimes the most painful separations become the foundation for the most beautiful reunions. I am Linda, and at 65 years old, I am finally completely radiantly free. The daughter of my heart has come home, and love has won.